Hello, and welcome to Wellbeing for Home, a series of tips and tricks for thriving in the work and home environment. I'm your host, Shannon O'Shea. I'm the Head of Member and Corporate Services for Smart Monday by Aon. If you're not familiar with us, Aon is a provider of professional risk, retirement, and health solutions in 120 countries. As many of you are at home, this series is designed to be delivered straight to you. No more than 30-minute bite-sized chunks and to leave you with some avenues and handy takeaways. Move over Uber Eats, Aon is doing home delivery. So you'll hear the term the new normal. At Aon, we believe in a better normal. To this end, this wellbeing series will give you tips and tactics for now and into the future. Your well-being is really important to us, it's important to you, and it's certainly important to your employer. It allows you and your family to improve these 4 pillars of well-being in bite-sized chunks. So Aon's well-being framework is well researched. The 4 pillars comprise of emotional, financial, physical, and social well-being. And obviously they are all interdependent. However, today's session is specifically on financial well-being, money tips for these challenging times. I would recommend having a pen with you or definitely pull your notes up in your iPhone, because what you'll find is there are some really handy tips and tricks that you can action immediately after the session. So now I'll introduce you to our very special guests, Janine Robertson and Paul Gordon. They are the architects of our financial wellbeing program here at Aon, and they're certainly wonderful authors of this book, Spenditude, A Life-Changing Attitude to Money. They've had 15 years together in the financial services industry, and they've certainly seen a lot. So join me in welcoming them today.
Thanks, Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon. It's a pleasure to be here. Janine and I have worked together, as Shannon said, for a long time, and we've actually been in a major financial crisis before. So you're kind of in safe hands with us, because we ran a program during the global financial crisis in 2008-9, where we saw a lot of people, Janine, who were in financial crisis, and there was things that we learned that we're going to share today.
Yeah, we did, Paul. We saw thousands of people running programs similar to this. And what we learned is what we want to share with you today. So we want to share what works to get people through challenging times. As you can see in the next slide, it's times like this bring lots of challenges. Don't you think, Paul?
Oh, yeah. I don't know about you, but I seem to be going through the 5 stages of grief on rotation every hour. Even this morning, I think I was bargaining and angry and denying in the first half an hour of being awake. So imagine if that's happening and that's boiling up in a lot of our heads. It's okay to feel this way, but when you think of the context of money and anxiety, it can be challenging. Now, Janine, you've got 3 kids under the age of 10 and between 5 and 10, actually. So you're in the magic number, and you're homeschooling and you're doing all that stuff. Can you relate to this 5 stages of grief rotation?
Absolutely. I think I've been jumping around them as well, although I do think I'm slowly moving more towards a place of acceptance, which is good. But interestingly, I'm seeing my kids jump around in this as well, and their behaviour is showing lots of different things at the moment. So I think we're all going through it. Having said that, I do have friends in positions that are a little bit more difficult than me, people with kids with additional needs or whose partners are going through different things with their jobs and things like that. So I think I'm doing okay for the moment. But maybe let's just have a look at some of the money thoughts that we've got on top of this.
Yeah, if you think about it, if we are going through these stages, and then you think of money thoughts, like even in good times, do you remember those good times, sort of like January? There was money thoughts constantly going through our head, whether it's kids' education, elderly parents, mortgages, jobs, income, they were all there. They've just been amplified during this time because we've got more time to think about them and our anxiety levels are higher. I know for me that one of the money thoughts that really is quite prominent is my son. He's in his mid-20s and he's really struggling because he lost his job because he was in a sort of an event style business. So that's a thought that really sort of hits me regularly, and the knock-on effect of that. Janine, what about you?
I think for me, I'd say, the mortgage. I live in Sydney. My kids as well, and my parents. I think just money's a major stress point, isn't it, for lots of people? And I think when you overlay that with what we were just talking about, the stages of grief, your brain's just really busy. Now, Beyond Blue last week came out with something suggesting that money was second only to loneliness as a cause of anxiety and depression. So that's really significant. So maybe let's just take a look at what people are actually doing to cope with these situations.
Yeah, it's interesting. The top trending Google search is money related. In fact, in Australia, out of the top 19, 10 relate to money. And one of them is Money Heist. And Money Heist is that Netflix show that is absolutely terrible, but I've just finished season 4, pretty much on rotation as well.
So, so Paul's
I
been
don't know
watching
why.
Netflix, and I'm sure lots of people have been doing things like that. But you can see on the graph on your screen that towards that early to mid-March, we started to see a really big spike in people searching for online shopping. Now, when you combine that with what you can see at the bottom of the screen there, which is that insomnia hit an all-time high in Google searches, I think you can see there's a bit of a risk. So when we were researching the book, we really did some research and talked to some experts about sleep and decision making. And it was very clear that poor sleep equals poor decision making. So what we'd like everyone just to think about is being intentional with your spending. So think differently, support your local coffee shops and restaurants. That's really important at the moment. Be mindful of your purchases. And that brings us to what we want to talk about today, which is some of the things that we're going to learn, behavior to money.
And maybe let's focus on this, because this is really the big insight from all the work that Janine and I have been doing. And we've categorized, there's 3 behaviors to money. Now, everybody that's watching this session will be one of these 3. So don't go hiding. The first type is a spender. A spender is somebody who has a very loose relationship with money. They love spending it. And if they don't have it, they borrow it and spend it. So that's the spender. At the other end of the scale is a defender. And a defender is somebody who knows where their money is all the time, hates waste, needs financial independence all the time. So that's the 2 opposites. And sitting in the middle is the slender. And the slender oscillates between spending, and when they spend too much, they get really guilty. Not like the spender, who doesn't really think about it too much. The slender, it hurts them. Buyer's regret is a big part of slender's world. Also, they can oscillate over to being a defender, and they get their stuff together. They get organized, but they can't stick with it. So if you thought about these 3 types and you still don't know who you are, you're a slender, because the slender makes up the majority of the population. Spenders very clearly defined, defenders very clearly defined. Later on, we'll talk about how a spender and a defender can survive a marriage, but that's for later. But let's have a look at what happens in these times with these 3 types. A spender is vulnerable to overspending during this crisis. Janine has already displayed the money spending habits online that are going through the roof. They don't have a connection to money, so they struggle sometimes to understand what they're doing, and they could, if not unchecked, buy their way through this crisis. Whereas a defender has a safety limit. That limit where if you go under that limit, you feel vulnerable. Well, they've got a very strong safety limit, whether it be 6 months pay or some dollar amount, and they get wobbly if that doesn't happen. So that's something that they're aware of. And the slender, as always, needs a hug. They feel very vulnerable. So that's the 3 types. Our advice, though, of all, Janine, is to adopt a defender mindset.
Yeah. So as we talked about earlier, we've been through this situation before, and there was 2 key things that we really learned. Now, one is that it's not your age, it's not your stage of life, and it's not your income that help put you into one of these categories. Now, as you move through life, you can adopt different behaviours and skills, but actually we develop these behaviours to money before we're the age of 7. So they really do form our baseline. Now, behaviour to money at times like this really is the key driver, and we really do need to adopt a defender mindset. So what would a defender do? Let's take a look. Well, defenders are aware. So we just talked about behaviour to money and having an awareness of your behaviour to money, but defenders are also aware of their actual money. Defenders spend less than they earn. They know where their money is, and they use tools to help them track it. Now, at the moment, not many of us are using much cash. Lots of services and providers are asking us to use our tap and go. So probably your bank knows where your money is, perhaps more than you do. Now, when you go and log into one of these things, be it your bank or searching for a money tracking app, you might think that it's going to be a little bit painful, but it really isn't as bad as you think. Those apps really do all the heavy lifting for you, and it helps you move towards that defender mindset to become aware of exactly where your money is going. So what else does a defender do?
Well, a defender is organised. So we're looking inside the brain of a defender now to understand a bit more about what they get up to. And this is something we're suggesting that you adopt. Remember, we're not saying become a defender forever. It's just during this time. It's the best advice we can give you. And if we go back to that global financial crisis, we saw that this mindset worked best by far. So one of the things they do is that they think about earning more and spending less. So with their salary, a defender understands and knows their hourly rate after tax. A lot of us who work in corporates don't really see our money. It goes into the bank, so we don't look at money in hourly rates. But if you did, it would be a great way of understanding how many hours work you need to do to buy a certain item. And that can just slow you down. We know it may not stop the purchase, but you can start to multiply how many hours of work to get this. And it's definitely a bit of a speed hump before buying. The second thing a defender does, they've already done this, they're onto every government benefit to find out is anything in the changes that are constantly happening that relate to them. They do it for themselves and they also do it for their loved ones. So there wouldn't be a thing they have missed, and we'll talk a bit about those later. And finally, from a defender's point of view, in good times, they see a side hustle as being key. Don't waste anything. You know, if I've got a spare room, Airbnb it. If I've got a spare car, rent it out to Uber. There's all these things that side hustles were very popular with. These days, we're thinking of a side hustle that makes you feel good. You know, think about depositing into the bank of your heart. So it might be that you have some gym equipment at home, you don't use it, and you know lots of people need gym equipment. Maybe give it away or sell it at a low cost. It'll make you feel good and it declutters. So a side hustle has a side hustle in itself. On spending less, they certainly would know how much money they're not spending during this crisis. And they would be looking at that in terms of their overall discretionary spend. It's your discretionary spend, which is the money you spend on things that are at your discretion, that the magic happens, where you can go back to those apps and really make differences. So this is an opportunity. And finally, big expenses. You've got to have those organised. And Janine will give us some tips now on how to organise some of those really big expenses.
So what you can see here on the screen, an icon for each of some of our largest expenses. So what do defenders do? Well, they look for changes with positive impact. Let's start with tax. So there's lots of change at the moment, as Paul mentioned, lots of government entitlements, and that's happening all over the world. So what's relevant for you or your loved ones? I know in Australia that there's some new rules around work from home expenses through the tax office that might be relevant for people that are able to work from home. There's also rules for things like redundancy, and they're different to other tax. So That might not be relevant to you, but it might be relevant to someone that you love, and it's important to seek that information. Rent is similar. There's lots of changes and rules coming out. So if you're someone that's renting, it's really worth finding out how that applies to your situation. Utilities, insurances, and debt. Lots of providers want to help. They have new policies in place, but they don't know if you're in need unless you pick up the phone. So I really would encourage you, if you need support, to access those services and talk to your providers. Now, education is a little bit different. If you are impacted by lowering your hours of work at a time like this, things like upskilling can be a really good place to go. And I know that lots of education providers are offering courses that are actually free at the moment. So defenders look for changes with positive impact. Now, if none of those felt like they applied to you, this is a good time right now to take a look at your large expenses and see if you can find a saving somewhere. Find the positive. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is something that's close to my heart, something that most of us can improve on.
Yes, and that is talking about money. I don't think defenders are any better than anyone else at talking about money, to be honest. But if you look at all the great civilizations, how they got wisdom through was to be good storytellers and share wisdom. Money has become quite a taboo topic in our civilization. And for that reason, a lot of people just don't understand how it works. And defenders don't go off teaching everybody how to do it. So here's where we can have an opportunity. So there's three types we're going to talk about. The first is the bottom group, which is a family with kids. Turn this into a game where you say to your kids, let's just guess every week how much we're going to save this week in isolation. And then put some sort of little prize at the end of it so that the one that's nearest to it wins. Now, you know what you've done? You've taught your kids the fundamental of money. You've set a goal, you've showed them how to save, and you've rewarded the measurement of saving. Now, if you've got a spender kid, you will find out during this exercise whether they are a spender or not. And maybe you need to work a little bit more on them. So spender kids can be identified as those with no delayed gratification. You know the type, I need it now, I want it now. So this is about taking your time to gamify these savings. The second group are couples. Spenders do marry defenders. And in a lot of cases, that's okay. But if they don't talk, that's where it goes wrong. Because believe it or not, spenders irritate defenders and defenders irritate spenders. So what we suggest during this time is talk about your various attitudes to money. Say that you're a spender, explain what it means. Say you're a defender, explain how you think, and then come up with a partnership or a couple's attitude to money that you agree on. You can still be who you are, but you agree on this attitude. And maybe a good one during this time is to agree that you'll adopt a defender mindset during this time of isolation. And finally, if you're living on your own, if you're living on your own, you need to be self-assessing what your behavior to money is, but then going out and finding out who are defenders that you know. Talk to them, ask them some questions, ask them what they're doing. You know, how did they find out about those government entitlements? What else are they doing? If you don't know any, then perhaps seek advice. Find somebody who does know and ask questions. We think this is important. Now let's have a quick look back at history.
So what you can see here on your screen is a graph of the Australian share market from the Spanish flu pandemic through to the current pandemic. You can see it's been a bumpy ride. Each time there's been an impact, no matter how big the fall, the market has recovered over time. Now, most people have retirement savings held in the share market. So what do defenders do? Well, they have a plan and they stay the course. So think about future you. What sort of position does your future self want to be in? At a time like this, it's important to nurture the future you. On slide 14, we can have a look at some of the other people in our lives.
Yeah, this is where defenders really are thanked later in life and in later times when they protect those they love. So we always see that defenders are more likely to seek and pay for advice because they know they don't know what they don't know, if that makes any sense, and they want to make sure they do things right. So there's all sorts of things you can do to protect those you love. If you've got elderly parents or grandparents or disabled kids or anything that needs a little bit of structure, we'd be suggesting talk to somebody like an estate planner or your lawyer about setting up the right sort of powers of attorney, etc. It's a great time to review personal insurances. What am I covered for? What would happen? How much would I leave behind? Really good time. And finally, one that I really recommend you do is update your will. But only half of you have a will, as the stats tell us. So maybe create a will. There's different ways to do it. One is talk to your lawyer, the other is talk to an estate planner, or another is there's plenty of online will service where they take you through a guided tour of how to make a will, and then a lawyer checks it off. This is low cost and it's peace of mind. I did it myself 2 weeks ago, and peace of mind is what came out the other end. So let's look at summarizing what we've talked about with a defender mindset. Create a bit of a checklist. Now, for spenders, they don't do that, but you'll need to just during this time, please. So the first thing, make sure you adopt a defender mindset. Go back and have a look at what does a defender do. Become aware of your spending. So this awareness is probably the most significant behavior and habit changing technique, because once you're aware, you've got baseline, you can go from there. Manage those big expenses and understand every single entitlement, including the entitlements that your employer offers you. Often employee benefits are hidden or not understood. Go have a look, ask others, ask a defender in your firm or your company, they'll know. Talk to your loved ones, create that challenge, protect those you love, and in a moment, we'll show you some links. So make sure you understand where to go for help.
Yeah, so I really would encourage everyone to create a bit of a mini plan and stick it on the fridge, make it visible. You're more likely to achieve success if it's somewhere that you can see it, and take action. So finally, I just like to flag that some people do get into trouble, and I just want everyone to know that help is available. So you can see a couple of those resources there on the left-hand side of the screen. They are free services, and I would encourage you to reach out if you do need those support services. The other one there is the moneysmart.gov.au website, which has plenty of tools, tips, resources, calculators, things that are really useful. If nothing else, that would be the best place to start. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll hand back over to you, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Janine and Paul. Absolutely fabulous session. I'm certainly a defender during these isolation times. I hope I can keep some of those wonderful habits that I've built. So as you'll see here, the Wellbeing for Home series has 4 pillars. You just experienced the financial pillar. The emotional pillar is built on sleep. So this session is called Sleep, the Wonder Drug, which I'm sure you'll certainly agree. You've got the physical pillar as well, which is about working safely from home and setting up your workstation for a sustainable, safe work environment from home. The social pillar is about achieving balance in isolation, which a lot of our research demonstrates is a key pillar to wellbeing. So thank you so much for attending this session, and from all of us at Aon, we wish you very well. For more insights, check out aoninsights.com.au, the Wellbeing for Home series.